Hello, I'm Laura Stam. I teach second grade at Ralph Wooders Elementary School in Thermopolis, Wyoming. The teaching video I shared with you is a core knowledge building lesson taken from Core Knowledge. It's a Civil Rights Leaders unit and a lesson specifically on Rosa Parks. I have taught Core Knowledge for 3 years, and when I first started teaching it, I found it difficult to keep the students engaged. I was reading and they were listening, but it was hard for them to pay attention, and I was dealing with behaviors. So I started with trying a packet that they could work on while I was doing the lesson, but I found that distracting and not really attending to the lesson. So then I stumbled upon Dr. Nathaniel Swain's Read to Learn Core Knowledge lessons that he had developed, and he had implemented a bunch of questions and engagement within the lessons and some other tasks, and I found those to be really beneficial for my students to keep them engaged. So I imitated his lesson format and used those within my lessons. The teaching video is divided into 3 parts. It has a review and intro, a lesson itself, and then an end of review task. In the review and intro, I start with a review of the lesson we taught the day before on Jackie Robinson. And it has 3 generic questions, and I took those questions based on Beck, McCowan, and Sandora's Questioning the Author book. And they're meant to generate discussion rather than elicit a specific response. And it's been really interesting to see the kind of discussion the children are having because of those questions, and it's the connections they're making. And I really found those questions to be really valuable and meaningful. I have a specific questioning routine that I have developed and I use throughout the lesson. The goal of the questioning routine is to get 100% engagement. I start with think time, and I'll pose the question, and then I put my hand up, and that is a signal to the students that that is their time to think for a minute. And then they put their hands up as soon as they have an answer. And then when most of the hands are up, then I will move into the next part, which is rehearsal with partner. And that they talk to their partner about the answer they have. And what I like about that is it gives all students a chance to respond. And I love to give my students as many chances as possible to respond. And it also gives them a chance to verbalize what they were thinking and kind of rehearse that in a less intimidating way with a partner rather than expressing their thoughts in front of the whole class. Then I do an all hands up cold call that I took from Pritesh Rachura. And he likes the all hands up rather than hands down because it brings energy into the lesson and it creates a culture of listening and a culture of contributing. So instead of students sitting there hoping they don't get called on, everyone has an answer and they're ready for whoever I do call on. And then I hold a cup of names that I found it difficult for me to remember who I have called on, and I tend to call on the same students every time. So those cup of names helps me make sure I'm calling on every student. And I also have their name in there twice so that they don't get comfortable. If I've already called their name, they could get called again. In that review, I also have a vocab preview of what words coming up within the lesson. I try to focus on 3 words. If there are extra words or phrases within the lesson that need clarification, they are embedded in the lesson, and I quickly clarify those and then move on. But the 3 words I focus on have a child-friendly definition, and then I use it in a sentence that I try to include a review of previous content. And so I found that another nice way to review things we've already learned. Then the lesson and the next part of the video is the lesson on Rosa Parks, and there's a clip of that. Something I want to point out in that my lessons is I do frequent checks for listening, and that is another piece taken from Pritesh Rachura to get 100% engagement. And a couple ways I do that is when I'm reading the text, I will pause and have them fill in the blanks. So that's a way to check in to make sure they're following along. They also have a copy of the text in front of them, and they're able to read the text from the screen. I will also stop frequently to have them repeat what I have said or question something I have just said, just to make sure that they are paying attention and attending to what we're learning. Another thing I wanted to point out is my slide decks are simple and with minimal distraction. Kind of following the cognitive load theory is what I'm trying to do. I especially liked Ollie Lovell's cognitive load theory in action and found that helpful in applying cognitive load theory in my classroom. Children learn from what they attend to, and so I like to be careful to control what is keeping their attention during the lesson. A couple places I wanted to point out in the lesson were specifically timestamp 1245, and that's when I review the meaning of one of our vocab words from earlier, the word accept, to review what its meaning within the context of the lesson to make sure they understood what that word means. And then timestamp 1401, I do a check for understanding. And we use the writing revolution, so it's kind of nice to use those lessons across reading and writing. And so I pose a because question. I found that really helpful to check for understanding. And it was interesting because the question was, why did Rosa Parks refuse to give her seat on the bus? And when I asked that, students were not quite understanding why she had given up her seat, and they didn't quite get it. So that was a really helpful check-in to see that they didn't get it, so then I was able to clarify the meaning of that for them. And then later on at the end of the lesson, we reviewed that part again, and they seemed to understand it better. And then the last part of the video is the final task that we do to end the lesson. This is something new I tried. We did a review with 5 W's and an H, and we reviewed it verbally first. We went through each part to summarize the lesson. And then they wrote a sentence based on the responses that we made. Just to wrap this up, the teacher advice I would give is I've developed these lessons over 3 years, and it's still a work in progress. There are a lot of things I still want to change, such as refining questions, questioning the questioning routine, engagement routine, cognitive load theory, vocabulary review, end of lesson tasks. And I would say to a new teacher, just focus on one part at a time and getting that done really well. And it can be overwhelming to try to do all those parts at once. So don't worry about that, and then be okay with it. It's a work in progress. And then my reflection, if I could reteach this, I would change 2 things. First, I noticed that I kind of mess around, and I would tighten up the lesson and step up the pace. And then I would also do on the end of lesson task, I had too much information, and so I would also include a shrink the paragraph that we would do verbally, taken from Lindsay Kemeny's 7 Mighty Moves, to kind of help cut out the unnecessary stuff so that when they went to write that, they didn't have so much to write.